was trying to put together the minutes from conversations with different people, and she had quite a job on her hands.
Yeah, anymore. It's nice to have these videos so that we can remember what the heck we really said or really did.
Yeah.
I mean, Lisa's notes are so detailed. I'm assuming she watches the meeting, so. Are we on?
Yeah, it should be good, and we need to turn the blinds off because the camera can't.
Sorry, I wanted to be
okay.
transparent, but
Yeah.
can't do it.
Okay, just to repeat what we went for before the recording started, I guess. We approved the minutes of March 21st, 2017, and no one had any changes to the agenda that they wanted to bring forward. So that brings us to item 4, citizen comments. And I don't see any citizens here. So we'll move on to item 5, new business discussion items, the Public Works report.
So these aren't necessarily new business. I think we talked about most of these last time around, so I'll just continue to provide you an update. We received bids for the 99E Bluff Waterline project, so we're just trying to continue to share the good news that it's going to be a little bit tight getting through 99E between South 2nd, which is at the top of the hill near the Falls View overlook, and really the bridge, the Oregon City Westland Bridge. That's about the end of the traffic control, so it spans that whole distance, and we'll be taking 4 lanes down to 2 lanes, 1 lane in each direction, for 10 days of construction. And the reason we need to do that is because we've got a water line that hangs off the edge of the bluff there, and you've probably seen it. It lines with about 3rd Street, or exactly in 3rd Street, and it comes down from the upper area and up near the promenade down, and actually goes under Highway 99E and under the railroad grade and through the mill site. So that water line has had problems. It's got a history of problems, so we're going to replace that water line, at least the piece that's exposed. And the reason for all the protection measures there is that when you're building a pipeline that's bolted to a rock face like that, that's so high, it's about 90 feet, that if something were to come dislodged, even a small rock, the concern is that it could impact vehicles. And so we've done about as much as we can to protect those vehicles with jersey barriers that'll be along basically the current center line, and then there'll be some fall protection fencing that will be above those concrete jersey barriers, and then of course most of the wall will continue to have the rockfall protection netting on it, but in the area where we need to work on the water line, we need to peel that back and do what we call scaling the rock. So they'll be climbing out on that rock with rock climbing kind of gear, and checking the rock to make sure it's tight and not necessarily gonna fall in the future. And if anything they find that seems loose, they'll either knock it free, or if it's a larger rock, they actually drill through the rock to a depth of about 6 feet, and they set an anchor bolt, and they bolt that thing right to the deeper basalt. And that's kind of a traditional practice for rockfall protection along a slope like that, that's vertical like that. And then the other thing they need to do, obviously, is replace the water line, and they'll also be drilling into the rock and bolting that. And I want to say those are fairly deep as well. I don't know if they're 6 feet, but they're deep. And so that's the reason for the closure. The contractor is Wildish Construction. They're really they've got these 10 days, and we've targeted a 10-day period between Memorial Day and 4th of July. So there's a lot of information that goes out to the freight community, to our neighboring jurisdictions on either end of that, and ODOT and their trip check and all those kinds of mechanisms will also be notified. Neighborhoods should get it, notice of that, and it's a pretty big effort. So just to kind of help minimize that, and maybe direct people to use, if they can, another route, maybe 213 as opposed to 99.
John, have we, or have you made any effort to send the information to the radio and TV stations, since a lot of people from Canby and south use that area, and they use railroad to get onto the 43 and go up into Lake Oswego or wherever, or to get onto 205 for that matter. And so it may be a point where we want to go to a larger audience to make sure people don't try to use the route.
It's a good question. My recollection is there's a project manager that's dealing with this, but my recollection is that she's got a whole range of public process, including radio and including ODOT's. ODOT is really going to help us out a fair amount on the public notification side of things, but I'll make a note of making sure we check the radio. Problem with that is, which stations do we go to? But
There's a few traffic people who do private traffic for all the radio stations.
we'll check, make sure.
Those diversions or detours be 24 hours a day for those days?
Right. Yes. We don't think we think the traffic control is going to go in place in the wee hours of the morning. So you might not see that until the next morning when you try to drive through there. But most of the work, because of the concern of rock scaling in the dark, and we think is going to happen during the day. So the contractor's indicated to us he doesn't anticipate doing much work at night other than setting up and taking down traffic control.
Are those bolts that go into that rock, are they of special material?
They are. I can't tell you which material off the top of my head, but they're intended to last a long time, considering moisture and those kind of, I think they're stainless, but could be wrong.
Okay.
So that's all I have on 99E. Alternate mobility study. That work continues. Actually, I left something on the printer, but I'll just speak from. You mind grabbing it? Yeah. So tomorrow is our third.
Thursday.
Tomorrow we have a technical advisory committee, so it'll be our third technical advisory committee, and then Thursday, you're right, Henry, is the community advisory group. So we're still running both groups, and at some point I think we may bring the two together, but we'll be going over technical memorandum number 2, which may have been sent out today. Do you remember seeing an email on that? So really the consultant on that is Kittleson and Associates. Thank you. And they've put together another slideshow to present basically the findings that they've made in their technical report. So I talked a lot about this last time. So for those of you that were here last time, I'm not going to go back through that, but the bottom line from this is that at build-out, there's a question about what year we look at for build-out. So our transportation system plan suggests build-out is 2035, and that's the year that we've been looking at. The metro region now has kind of moved that forward another 5 years, and they're suggesting we look at 2040. So there's some questions about that'll be discussed and answered probably tomorrow and the next Thursday as well. So it's these two committees, they both get very similar information. Just one group is obviously in the industry and the other's more kind of a community group. The other thing that they've kind of come to determination on at our last meeting was just how much congestion and how long that congestion lasted. And Kittleson Associates has done a much more detailed analysis working with Metro and some of their growth numbers to figure out really how many hours we would see congestion at the intersection of Beaver Creek and 213. they've also looked at Redland. So we've added Redland Road and 213 to the scope of work. So tomorrow night, Brian gets to make a decision on amending that scope, but we're already actually asking the contractor to do some of that work. So I sure hope you approve it, Brian, because we've got to pay them somehow. But basically, we've added in the Redland Road project as well. And so they'll be reporting on the number of hours, and it's surprisingly high. I think when we were at our last meeting, we were talking more of that 3 to 5 hour range. I think some of the numbers, if we weren't to do anything down there, it was more like 6 hours of congestion if you count the morning and the evening. So that would be, when I heard that number, I kind of choked on it a little bit because it seems too long for a city to exceed the standard, which is, if you remember, we have a standard for congestion that we use, volume over capacity. It's a little hard number to kind of understand, but really what it says is the capacity is what it is. It'll handle as much traffic as it can handle, and once you get that, it doesn't necessarily, it spills over, and vehicles may go a different direction, but the intersection can never really handle more than its capacity, right? But the volume of traffic that can go through that could be much higher. So that volume to capacity, if it goes above 1, you've exceeded the capacity of the intersection. And so they measure it against that 1, and they're saying basically that it would exceed 1 for if we did no improvements along there at the Beaver. I don't remember the Redland Road results, but it was for Beaver Creek Road, it was over 6 hours. So one thing that they're planning to recommend is to do one of the more, I'll call it more simplified solutions, which is to add a free right-hand turn lane. So if you're coming from, say, the high school heading towards Oregon City, but wanting to turn down 213 to go towards 205, that turn right now has got a yield stop there. And because of that, in the morning hours in particular, it backs up traffic on Beaver Creek Road. And so there's actually 2 hours of congestion because that's not a free-flowing right. So they'll talk through that specific improvement and how that could improve on the AM kind of standard exceedance. So they'll be sharing that information. There's some other recommendations for the PM, but that's a much more difficult problem to solve. So I think what now they're recommending is more like a 3-hour exceedance, and right now the standard is no more than 1 hour. So it would be a couple more hours that we would add to the amount of congestion that we could live with at Beaver Creek and 213. They'll also be reporting information on Redland Road, which I know is important to Bob, in your case, the whole Holcomb area as well. So I was trying to see, I may have that in these results here. I guess the other thing is just some of the costs of that project to get that free right turn. And the Redland Road project, some of you might remember when we did the Jug Handle project, there was a recommendation for an additional project at Redland Road. It was about a $10 million project to add another through lane through northbound lane on 213, and then made some changes at the intersection of Redland that allowed for a free right turn lane and another through lane southbound as well. So that was about a $10 million project. Now, what I'm understanding, I don't fully understand what they're proposing because I haven't reviewed all that information yet, but it sounds like they're proposing a combination of that would be more along the lines of $3.5 million project. So between Redland Road and Beaver Creek, I think they have this idea that you could spend about $5 million, add that to the capital improvement projects, get enough capacity out of there to keep the hours of limitation in that 3-hour range as opposed to something much greater than that. So more analysis, more justification for why they think that's a good recommendation. And again, I may not have done it justice, but that's my recollection of where it's going.
Do you have any idea what I've noticed recently that the queuing on Redland Road from 213 all the way to Holcomb, it's been queuing all the way back to Holcomb, and that's just a recent observation I've had. I don't know if you've noticed that lately.
Well, I have noticed that also once today, about 9:30, Highway 213 westbound was totally plugged up. And I think that's the reason. And then one day last week, about the same time, 213 was just really backed up terribly. I don't go out usually in that time of day. I avoid it since I'm retired. But I don't know if that's a common thing or not there. I think it would have to do some
I've
more
just noticed
research on
recently I've seen queuing from 213 all the way to Holcomb, where it's just stacked and stopped. So people can't proceed even though the signal is.
that. And I think the reason has to be the entrance to 205.
I can add a little bit to it in that I go over to Gladstone during noon hours and every once in a while, and I am seeing more and more and more stopped dead in 205 traffic for the going across the bridge westbound. So what he's observing could be the 213 traffic that wants to merge onto 205 westbound and can't, because they're really only doing about 3 miles an hour through there. And that's recent, since about January that I've seen this phenomenon, and it happens around noon, I'll say from 11 to about 3.
Do you know if there's anything going on the other side of the bridge?
I don't think there's a thing.
I drive the back roads through the little town of Carver, and for quite a while now, Highway 224 on the other side of the river had been closed. I don't know if they had slides or something like that. I think it was over a month it was closed, and that definitely
It's still
affected.
closed.
Okay, it affected traffic that would come in and go through Carver and go out to 212 and go in that way. So maybe some of it is being brought in through the back roads into Holcomb and down to the intersection you're talking about. But there's literally no traffic going east or westbound out of Carver on 224 because it's blocked off, and that stuff it's got to go someplace. So it could be being pushed over to our intersections.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, Jonathan, I would say there's times when we have flare-ups, and this is true for 205, but, it sounds like what you're seeing is more of a free-flowing 213, but still Redland Road is plugged up, which sounds more like a signal timing issue than backup due to 213. That's usually what we see when 213 plugs up. We see the backup all the way to Redland Road. So I can look into what I think would be the more likely scenario, which is that the signal timing, for whatever reason, there doesn't provide enough green time, and that would be a problem if they had maximized the green time. But that I seldom see that kind of scenario happening, so I wonder if it's just maybe a timing issue.
Are you talking about the signal at Redland and 213?
Right.
See, my observation is that 213 is so plugged up that people aren't able to enter from Redland Road. They just sit there.
Right, which is a problem beyond signal timing. That would be problematic with 205, like
Yes,
you said,
right. Mm-hmm.
because it's not sitting there going southbound, right? That's free flowing.
But
Yes.
as John described, what I've observed is a free-flowing 213 with the queuing occurring between 213 and Redland Road.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
in Holcomb.
if that scenario is the case, then it's more like, is there sufficient green time on Redland Road?
The
And-
very, very short green time right
Yeah.
now. It's amazingly short. Sometimes you see 10 cars get through there. You're lucky before it changes again. And that's not because of congestion on 213. It's just low priority from coming off
Yeah.
of Redland.
So I mean, some of that can be adjusted, assuming there's, again, assuming that that green time hasn't been maximized, and that's all they can eke out in terms of efficiencies. But I'd want to ask that question of the state first. So I'll make a note of that and just look into that.
ODOT signal crews do tend to give about 80% of the available green time to the state highway. And
Well, I think that's an overgeneralization.
no,
Henry.
it's not. It may be undergeneralization, because there's a ratio that they try to maintain as high as they can for the highway traffic versus the intersection traffic. And so in order to do that, they have to keep the green time up.
There's probably instances where it's maximized to where, let's say Glen Oak and 213, where we know that intersection has been exactly that. It's at capacity, and the amount of backup on 213 from what I've heard, it goes back to near the golf course at that intersection. So in those cases, I think you're right. They probably they do whatever they can to keep the throughway, or 213 in this case, as free flowing as possible, right? With minimum green time to the side streets. But in those instances where it's a balanced usage, in other words, even though it's a city street, they're still going to favor 213 because they consider it an expressway, but they also give more green time to those than the 80-20% ratio. They really, I think, do a good job of trying to monitor all legs, even if they're city jurisdictional legs.
The real bottom line is you're in trouble if you go one way, or you're in trouble if you go the other. So you're just going to get hung anyway, no matter what you do.
Yeah. Hopefully not hung, but yeah, you're going to be delayed a little bit. But
Don't be so graphic.
I think I got to get going here, John.
yeah, we tend to hang commissioners, but
Kind
not.
of a hostile group here,
So I guess also, one thing I would say about this alternate mobility stuff is it's pretty complicated. So if you're not, in Henry's shoes where he's sitting through the updates, my updates aren't probably as good as you would get from the consultants who are specialized in this, right? But so it's moving forward, I guess. I definitely see the writing on the wall, which to me means. Well, a couple things we heard from the state. I think I mentioned this last meeting. The state and the county were at our last meeting, and they both said, there's just higher priorities in our region than 213 and Beaver Creek Road. So we see very little opportunity in the short or long-term future for funding, the kind of improvements that might solve the problem long-term. Let's say a large-scale interchange at Beaver Creek and 213. For one, that's probably upwards of a $50 million project, and everybody recognizes that it's on steep slopes and it's got impacts to at least a couple of the corners that have businesses there. So they're looking at solutions that can be implemented, can be done without state or federal or county dollars. So it's more likely that the improvements that we have to do, that $5 million worth of projects, are going to have to be locally funded. And there's not too many options for that, right? We've got gas tax and SDCs. And and we've got a business community who's kind of adamant about SDCs being too high. So how do we balance all that? That's the interesting kind of dilemma that we're working with. All at the same time, we also want jobs and creation of a thriving community out there in Beaver Creek and maybe Park Place. So that's where we're at. That's any questions or thoughts before I move on to the next topic? Okay. Let's see. What was the next topic? Myers Road. That's another big project that would have a positive impact on Beaver Creek and 213. And tomorrow night, Commission makes a decision to award a contract to OBEC, who is a design firm that we've kind of negotiated a scope. It's a big scope for Myers Road because after spending a little bit more time with ODOT, they want to make sure we're doing all the improvements that need to be done on 213 at that intersection. So there's the addition, if you're familiar with it, there between Myers Road and Glen Oak Road, there's kind of a narrow section there where it goes to 2 lanes, and there's a large culvert kind of deep in the canyon there. We're not proposing to replace or widen there, but as you get north of that, we would be adding a through lane that would complete the 2 through lanes all the way through the Myers Road intersection and take it all the way to Malala. And so getting that work done, completing a left turn pocket where there's a concrete median right now so that vehicles heading southbound would be able to get into a turn pocket, be able to make the left turn onto Myers Road. And then because there's already a turn pocket going the other direction, so if you want to turn west onto Myers Road in the existing segment of Myers Road, you can do that now. So we'll be adding that, and because of the existing signal is what we call span wires, so all the signal heads are hung off of wires instead of a signal arm, and because of the widening, all that would have to be moved. So we're essentially replacing that whole signal with a new signal system. And once we do that, all the corners would need to be upgraded for ADA access. So there would be, the appropriate slopes for wheelchair ramps and folks in wheelchairs, and impeded by variety of disabilities, they'd be able to maneuver through that intersection. So that's mandatory. The minute you touch even a curb on one of those corners, or you do paving around one of those corners, they require you to upgrade those. So all those things would be in addition to the work that we were planning for Myers Road, right? So we've been pretty focused on what we could do to get Myers Road built through, and we had some plans for the ODOT improvements, but that's grown somewhat from what we had originally thought. So the contract with OBEC, I want to say it's close to $650,000 for design phase services for all of that. So it's a big contract. It'll be a great improvement. We're still working on trying to acquire appraisals and right-of-way from the 4 property owners for Myers Road. So that's still work in progress. But in the meantime, we're going to get moving with the design services. So
I am so glad that after 20 years, we're finally getting to get that thing built.
Yeah, it would be nice. It would be a nice improvement. We don't build many new roads like that, right? The last one, I think, was the other leg of Myers Road.
Yeah,
right?
the last one was Myers Road from Gaffney to 213.
Yeah. So it would be a great project for the city. So with that, the other thing I wanted to mention that isn't in the report is we just sent you, some of you may have already got it through a different avenue, but we realized that TAC didn't get invited, but on next Tuesday we're doing if you remember, we did an SDC forum at the end of 2015. We had an SDC forum with the Chamber. They helped sponsor that, and I think this one we're calling an SDC roundtable. We're doing it in here, so we're not gonna spend, we had the Museum of Oregon Territory before, and we did quite a bit of stuff to kind of kick that off. This will be a shorter 2-hour session, and we're still bringing in DKS and Associates to kind of present the project list and some of the updates that have happened to the project list, and the FCS group, who does kind of our SDC financial analysis, they'll be here to talk about that. And so they'll be providing some maybe new ideas. Like I said, the Chamber in particular and the business community have been pressing pretty hard for the city to find a way to find solutions for things that they consider problems with SDCs in Oregon City. We hope to turn them around a little bit on that. So we'll have some new information in terms of neighboring city SDCs and a lot of information on SDC policy that, will, again, at the end of the day, I'm not sure we'll see much changes, but we'll present that information to them and make some
John,
recommendations.
What was the time and the location for the meeting?
It's here. It's
Okay.
625 Center Street, and the time, let me look at my calendar here so I get it right.
Next Wednesday, right?
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
I think it's 9:30
I
in the
think
morning.
9:30 to
Yeah,
11.
9:30 to
Okay.
11:30.
Okay.
Yep. So that'll be an interesting update. We had a little blunder, and well, not really a blunder. I think that I go on vacation the next day. And I wanted to get this done, and we committed to the chamber to getting it done. And we actually knew that the Oregon City Business Alliance also had their meeting, so they're back to back, and we're going to try and let folks out just a little bit early to be able to get to the Oregon City Business Alliance lunch as well. Do you remember the topic, John, on that?
I don't.
Education? Yeah. Okay. What kind of education? Just anyway. Maybe. I think it was about, just making sure our youth are educated so that they can be a vibrant community. I think that was. So anyway, that you're welcome to attend that. It's RSVP because we're trying to make sure we've got enough, space in here. But we can hold quite a few people in this room, so feel free to attend.
Any pool going on how far through the agenda you'll get?
Say that again.
Is there a pool going to see how far through the agenda you'll get? Reading through that, I can see it getting stalled on about item 1 or 2.
Possibly. The problem is, I think the last forum, I'm trying to remember if it was 3 or 4 hours. I think we started the idea of doing the forum for 4 hours, and the business community was feeling like we needed to narrow that, so we took it to 3, and we're going to do this one at 2. If we need to regroup and do something again, we sure can. But I just think it's important, especially when we have that element of our community that's kind of suggesting we really need to change to be responsive to that. And it's taken us over a year to get to be that responsive. But in the meantime, we've been doing a few things that I think will be important for folks to understand. So we'll try.
Lisa, if you want to RSVP me, you can do it right now.
Yeah, and me as well, since I'm supposed to be the chamber rep here, I probably ought to be there.
I don't know. I think it's pretty easy to do online or in the email. Yeah.
But it's even easier to tell Lisa to do it.
True. I'm trying to remember if there's questions that they ask of you, or if it's just a RSVP. If it's as simple as an
The
RSVP.
one I got was just an
RSVP. Okay.
VP.
Okay. South End Road is another one I can give you a little update on. So, for those of you that don't know, South End Road between really 5th Avenue and the top of the hill is closed to southbound, so the uphill lane. You might also not know that segment of roadway belongs to the county, so we haven't transferred jurisdiction on that. For all the right reasons, right? We don't. It's always been a liability and continues to be a liability, and but at the same time, it's pretty important to the Oregon City community. So we're staying pretty closely in contact with the county on that. So far, we've been working on kind of the closure and how to deal with the detour route. We're looking at also looking at both lanes being detoured for a period of time, especially if it continues to deteriorate. We had reduced the speed a few days earlier to 25 instead of 30, but then the county, I think, decided that it had enough grade dropping and grade changing there that they needed to close it. So if to do, I suspect there's probably a really short-term fix, which might be something more like a milling and patchback, followed by maybe a longer-term fix that might be a much more structural dig out, and then a really long fix, which might be something a little bit greater that might allow for more of a soldier pile wall, something on, on multi-million-dollar fix.
They have markings on the pavement for the mill and pave.
They did?
Yeah.
Oh, that
Begin.
happened today.
Yeah. Just begin here, end here.
Oh, okay, good. That's good.
The last time this happened, the county had a geologic report out, and I think there was some language to the effect that the ultimate recommendation was a dig out and rebuild on the slide itself.
So they've, I don't know if it's the same geotechnical engineer, but they've hired Landslide Technologies, and we also brought in our geologist from Foundation Engineering, and their plan is to do much more investigation and probably monitor that for at least a year, mostly because there's been so much slide activity in the region that there's no drilling contractors available to do the drilling that they need to set the inclinometer to measure, how much movement there's going on. So they have realized that, and they're still pressing pretty hard to get those those inclinometers installed. But some of them are in precarious locations to where they probably wouldn't want to further contribute to the slide activity by trying to build a little access road to get the equipment in there to do that. So they're thinking through that in a fair amount of detail. I think some of the inclinometer work they could do without building such a little access road like that. Others they need that. So but they intend to install those, do some surveying just to kind of ground monitor the amount of movement that's going on. That's often helpful. I walked it Friday with our geotech, and he wasn't ready to walk away from the idea that it was a larger scale slide versus a small, edge slide. But what I can tell you is that when they built that road, it looks to me like they built it quite a bit like you might build or what you might see in a jetty out in an ocean jetty, where they place this large rock, 300 pounders, and then they bridge that with, kind of a gravel section on top. In that slope below the road, there's sections of it where you can actually walk and you can pull away the ivy, and you see those boulders, and you can see a small animal might find that a nice place to hide out. There's just caverns and things back in there where I think when they blasted the hillside, they let all that fall, down, and probably maneuvered it around with machinery as they could. But I think they bridged all that with dirt and rock on top of that, and that's what we've been driving on for many years. The problem is that road, the pavement's not that old there, but it's old enough to where it's kind of rutted out. So the drainage no longer just kind of sheds equally across that. It collects in those rutted areas, and where it can finally exceed the capacity of the rut or turns out for whatever reason, every one of those areas where that surface water runoff has saturated the shoulder is where you see the grade changes. So I believe there's localized sliding that really needs to be dug out and fixed, and that may not be a forever fix, but it'd be a long-term, it'd be more of a longer-term fix. I think the markings that you saw are more like move a milling machine in there, get it milled, get it paved back, and that way we can open it again and people can drive through it. So there's definitely a couple of phases to what we do there. Long term, we've got the South End concept plan. It's kind of an important facility for us. So, if we're really serious about growth in that area, I think the city and the county probably need to have conversations about maybe something that not only, is stable, but might, provide at least enough width for a pedestrian or bicyclist to be able to get up the hill, right? And that's a much bigger thing and a much larger investment. And just like these other problems we have around the region, I don't exactly have the answer to how we would fund that. But so that's the South End story for today. We've got one other road closure, which is Trillium Drive. It's behind the hospital. That's also a landslide project. We've been monitoring that. Not nearly the traffic that South End has on it, but it's still a neighborhood connection that is important. So we're still trying to figure out what we might do with that piece of roadway. I think I'm done.
Any updates on Main Street? Any realistic idea when they're going to have that opened up?
Yeah, that we just met with you mean the Cove area, right?
Right.
We just met with them. Right now, I don't know if right now the signs say this, but we've directed them to change that to summer of 2017. So they're looking at the end of July. But that scale has been moving quite a bit. They're making much better progress. They're down to about I want to say 10,000 cubic yards. They've pretty much moved most of the dirt from the North Park, which is over behind the treatment plant, over to their site, and they're starting to distribute those piles of concrete that have turned to piles of gravel across their developable site. They're getting those building pads ready to start putting buildings on. So they're making a lot of progress all of a sudden. If they could, if the weather would cooperate, I think they'd be moving along much quicker. But that's been a tough one. We've been meeting with them pretty regularly just to get the utilities and the geotechnical concerns right. I think I mentioned this before. They ran into the edge of the landfill because there was a landfill on that side of 205 as well. So they ran into an edge of that, and they've just found a variety of problems associated with the soil conditions and the amount of rain we've been dealing with. All those things have complicated that project a lot.
John, on the road back to the sewer plant, there's that building back there that's on piles.
You mean
the old
one of
Penny's?
those two storage buildings that sit back there?
You go back and right about the end of the pavement, there was on the riverside. There's a building that's been sitting on piles up in the air. That was Penny's warehouse when Penny's was in the Oregon City Mall, and the ground was level with the bottom of that building, not the piles, but the bottom. The piles were all underground.
Wow.
That's how much that has sunk.
Well, that is close to the landfill.
That's part of the old Rossman landfill.
Yeah. Well, you caught me at Penny's. I didn't even know we had a Penny's in town there, Henry. So you got me.
They were in the outdoor store.
Oh, okay.
You're not that long in the tooth yet, John.
I guess not. Didn't know that.
I'm pleased to see that they completed the extension of the left turn lane on Beaver Creek onto 205.
213.
213. And they did that faster than I imagined they could.
Yeah, well, we get some of them done kind of quick. There's other ones that don't go so quick.
Yeah, right.
That one went pretty quick. Yeah, didn't have a lot of complexity to it, but yeah.
I should also mention that it's nicer on Lynn Avenue right now getting through that repair work. Although I did notice the roller went up there this afternoon. So maybe they're going to put another lift down.
Yeah, we're going to mill off 2 inches. So we patched it.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to mill off 2 inches in full width, including bike lanes, and patch it back. So it'll be much better.
It already is much better.
Yeah, it's good. So that's all I have to report, there's lots to talk about, but.
John, I would like to thank the street crew for fixing the bus bench up there on Monroe and 5th Street. That is a very nice installation now.
Okay, with that, we'll move to item 6, communications. This is usually just information kind of stuff, but I'd like to kind of go over each one of them to see if anybody has any questions. The first one is the pavement maintenance utility fee map of projects. That's pretty straightforward, I think.
Yeah, I had a question on that. How does the amount of pavement maintenance utility fee work shown on the map now compare with the amount of work that was done last year?
Dollar-wise,
Well, yeah, it seemed like the map last year had more colored streets on it too, just from memory. But dollar-wise and length of streets, you have that figure?
I don't, but I can get it for you. Yeah, I mean, actually, we do our annual report. You probably haven't started that yet for last year, right?
I've done it for 15, I haven't for 16, and we haven't received the bids yet for this year, so we wouldn't know how much the map that you see here is going to roughly equate to quite yet.
But we can look at estimates,
Uh-huh.
and
Look at estimates.
we can definitely compare the 2 years. You know, that's definitely a function of how much, quote, like simple work like milling and paving we do versus full depth, structural dig out. 15th Street, for instance, has got a fair amount of complexity to it as well. So
John, when is the next street evaluation contract going to go out to update the?
I want to say that happens. That's happening either yet this year or definitely this summer. That's with Pavement Services Inc.
Right.
Have you seen a contract with them?
I have. I don't have a schedule for them yet, but we have settled on a contract.
Madison between 4th and 5th suffered tremendously this last winter. We've got one pothole that's got a rubber marker, cone marker base in it in order to fill it.
Did you report that?
Well,
I guess you are right now. We'll take a look at that.
John, is Oregon City partnering with any other jurisdictions with the contractor that does microseal?
We are.
Okay, that's a.
Yeah, we Hillsborough, right?
Yeah,
City of Hillsborough kind of drives that part of the project, and
But we get good bang for the buck.
we
out
get
of
much
that
better
program,
bang for the
so.
buck doing it that way. Yeah, so we still have to authorize a contract, but the bid document goes out, and they include all of our work in it, and that way we get we pay the same unit price that they would pay. So yeah, it's a better way of doing it. Matt Pullison he's the one who brought that to us as an idea, and he's been doing it last couple of years anyway,
Yes,
right?
yeah, last couple of years.
Yep.
Great.
So we'll try and get back to you with certainty on comparison between the 2 years. Does that work?
Yeah, that would be fine.
this one's a little easier.
Okay, next item is transportation system plan projects likely to be funded. That's quite a list.
So, what can I say about this? So this is the project list that was in the transportation system plan that was done in 2012. Oh,
2013.
Yeah, getting my master plans messed up. But so this is the project list that's considered likely to be funded, and there was another project list that was unlikely to be funded. So these are projects that that when added up, and when you add up all those project costs, that's essentially the numerator in our SDC calculation, and the denominator would be the amount of growth that we have, right? So that's how we come up with our unit rate for a system development charge. We say, here's our project list, here's how much that's going to cost us, here's how much growth we project. Growth needs to pay for all that new development because it's all additional capacity to the system. So you divide the cost of the projects by the number of estimated units of growth. And so this list here is pretty much the simplified list. It provides a pretty short description of what the work is and gives you some kind of timeline on what the priority is. Now, we try to follow this, but sometimes priorities change based on development or based on different needs. But this is our project list today. Now, if you come to the SDC roundtable meeting, we're proposing some changes to the list, and it's mostly adds to the list and expanding the list to give us a little bit more flexibility. So some of those projects that maybe are on the unfunded list, we might actually propose that they should be on the funded list. And so I just want you to know that this list has the potential to change. It's what's adopted in our transportation master plan. It's what we use when we work with the development community. If we establish a capital project that's on the list, when we establish our capital project program, often we look to this list. And I would say the kind of changes that we're talking about aren't going to change these major projects, definitely. But there will be some changes, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about what those would be because I'm not really prepared to do that. But there's also a series of maps that go with this. So if you notice on the project number, there's projects that are start with the letter D, and there's projects that start with the letter D is for driving, W is for walking, B is for biking. There's a FF, which is family friendly. There's a S, which is shared use. Now, for those of you that have been on the TAC, you remember that all those different types were defined in our transportation system plan, and we kind of worked with the consultant to get those lists like that and use that naming convention. If you're new, Edward, you probably don't necessarily get that configuration, but if you haven't looked at our transportation system plan, you'll probably better follow that. But so anyway, that's what this list is. You'd ask for the list, and it's available online as well, right? You pull this from online?
Yeah. It is, yeah.
Yeah. So
I had a quick question. So if we are overly aggressive in trying to meet perceived needs, that builds the cost of the SDCs. How do you figure out what criteria you're going to use to decide whether we're realistic or overly ambitious or whatever? Is there some criteria that decide that if you sit down with the SDC committees, they can go through that and say, okay, these 5 projects really should pop out of this because they're overly aggressive based on some definition?
So there is science that goes into that. We talked about a lot of that at the time of the transportation system plan adoption. We're going to talk more about that as we talk about updates to the project list. But really, a lot of the prioritization comes from just understanding of the system and the system needs. So, for instance, the Beaver Creek 213 projects might carry a fair amount of they might be a higher priority now than they were before, based on the amount of input that we've heard from the community and the commitment that we need to make to the state in terms of adoption of that plan. So really those things that are in an adopted plan tend to get more priority. When we did the TSP, though, it was really about looking to the consultant to help us figure out which ones were higher priority. Some of these projects have a little bit of SDC funding and a lot of other, quote, other funding. And sometimes that other funding is not always, there's uncertainty about where that other funding is going to come from unless we see gas taxes increase. So in those situations, we might not choose to fund those projects because there's no answer for how we would fund the other percentage of the project. So there's definitely safety criteria that goes into, if there's a safety problem, it's more likely to be on the list. So but a lot of our projects aren't necessarily driven so much by safety as they are by volume and capacity needs. that answer that, sort of?
Right. Brings up some other questions too. So anyway, I'll see you at the meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would, I mean, there's, I think the transportation system plan probably does a better job of describing that than I just did, so I'd probably want to open that document up.
John, there was significant work put into the creation of the list on the transportation system plan with significant public input. How are you addressing adding projects to that? Because the TSP is an adopted plan, so you just can't say, oh, we're going to throw another project into the list. That doesn't meet the requirements of that adopted plan.
I think we can add, we've done it before, it's a matter of how many we add. So in the past, when the system list has been modified through resolution of the city commission, you're right, if it gets controversial or if it's, if it seems like a project that's not necessarily a community value, we probably need to take that to a bigger public involvement. And this change may be large enough to where we may decide to do that.
That was just my worry, and I wanted to...
You're right. You go through so much effort through a transportation system plan to get to this kind of a final product. And so we need to be cognizant of that.
Okay.
John, from the projects from the 2013 plan, have there been projects that have been constructed or that are under design or where right-of-way has been acquired?
Yes. So that's the other reason for the update is we're moving some of those into the completed area. So the Beaver Creek left turn lanes is a good example of that. Myers Road, those are all projects on this list.
I sort of appreciate a list of all the projects that were done or underway as well.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of smaller projects here too, like sidewalk projects that were included in the plan. I don't know if any of those were done.
Seems like I saw some notes in these documents that were somewhat more completed or in progress.
Well, maybe the information was there then.
We haven't added those kind of notes.
Oh,
This
okay.
is just straight out of the TSP, so.
Oh, I was looking at something else then.
Yeah, I think the goals for this committee, if you look at the last page, they have done, in progress, and some
Oh,
things
yeah,
like
okay,
that.
you're right, John. Yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, right. Yeah, different topic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Cove, for instance, they're building the roundabout, they're expanding, they're building new sidewalks out there, new bike lanes, so that would be one of those that we could, even though it's not completed, we could probably strike it from the list, right?
There's some progress being made on it.
Yeah.
And like you said, Myers Road too, and then you have that Myers Leland Lynn corridor. I don't know if that was in here or not, but
No, that's one of those plans that we would like to amend the list to include those projects. So that's an area where, again, we went through a fair amount of public involvement on that one. It's my belief that we should be able to incorporate that in. Now, at the end of the day, it may be, you've added all these projects, how are you going to fund them? And, so it might mean an STC increase to do that. Or it might be, let's go ahead and do like many agencies do, recognize that your list is bigger than you can truly fund, but it gives, having a longer list gives you the flexibility to be able to match those with grants or, move forward with, if a developer wants to do something in a particular area, but it's not on your funded list, then you can't really help them with that. But if it's on your funded list, you could help them with that. But recognizing at the end of the list, you're probably going to be short funding unless you change your SDCs. So that's...
I have seen lists that are 150%
of the funding.
of the funding available.
Yeah,
But it's in the plan
like that.
like that. And it's recognized that there's not sufficient funding, but at least if additional funding becomes available, it's part of the adopted plan.
Yeah.
or possibly adopt a new fund generation of money, new fund to generate money, like say a gas tax, city gas tax.
Yeah. Vehicle registration fee.
Vehicle registration fees. As much as I would hate to pay an extra amount, I would much rather pay the extra amount than to drive on gravel.
Yeah. Well, hopefully our existing roads, you won't have to drive on gravel. That's hopefully what the pavement maintenance utility fee will do to preserve. But new roads, we're talking, this is mostly about added capacity, right?
This is added capacity, but it also addresses things like widening and putting shoulders on existing roads and making other improvements to the roads that contribute to the continued upgrade and the continued use of that road.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about project maintenance and utility fees, do we have a good grasp of the conditions of our current roads? And I'm assuming we don't have enough money to maintain what we currently own.
So that's two questions.
So, and we have a project list that we're continually maintaining certain roads, but I'm assuming also that we're going to have to let some roads degrade.
So
I'm not quite sure where I'm going, but
let me answer the first one because it's similar to what Henry asked. Are we doing a new pavement survey? And my recollect is we're doing that this summer. I can't remember if we're doing it before July 1 or after, but we every 3 years we hire a consultant that comes in and evaluates our pavements and gives us what you may recollect, which is called a pavement condition index. Mm-hmm. So that pavement condition index says between 0 and 100, where's this roadway sit, right? So if it's at 100, it's a brand new road. If I don't remember the breakdown, but it basically 80s probably in good condition, 70s in fair condition, 60s in poor condition, and it just kind of goes
gets
down.
Below 60, you're
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah.
rebuilding the road rather than
Right. And so we collect that, we maintain that. That information's available to, once we get it and culminate it, it's actually available on our GIS system. So you can, as a resident, can go in and get information by the year it was documented. So just know that information's available out there. So once we have that information, we use that to help inform our 5-year pavement maintenance plan. And that's a project that I'm trying to remember. It seems like our 5-year pavement maintenance plan is about 2 years old now. And it looks out 5 years and kind of says, well, based on the money that you have available, here's what you can afford to fix, and here's what we recommend. That the computer kind of spits that scenario out. It basically says if you've got $2 million to spend every year for the next 5 years, here's what we think you ought to do, right? Here's what the computer thinks you ought to do based on that condition analysis. And then really Martin and Matt, and sometimes I used to do it, not as much, but there's them combined with our consultants look at a lot of other criteria. Does it need utility work? Is it a bus route? Is it programmed for a grant or something like that? And we start trying to make those other more subjective decisions that the computer software that we have isn't smart enough to figure out. And then from that we establish a 5-year look ahead. And we try to match that so that we can share that with the utility companies so that maybe they can get their work done at that time as well. So that's how we've been doing it. So that kind of gives you that gives us a short-term look at what we should be doing with pavement. And to answer, I think, your last question is, do we have enough, right? I would say we're doing better than many cities, but there's definitely some large-scale projects that are bearing down on us. I would say Center Street, High Street, Lynn Avenue. We just got the grant for Malala. We're going to spend a fair amount of money on that from our PMF or from our pavement maintenance utility fee just because of the pavement conditions. There's some bigger scale projects that are, it's going to be hard for us to spread all that out around without Matt and the street crew doing a lot of what we call stopgap work, right? He's actually going to do some on High Street this year because it's so bad, it's so rough, and so I think we're holding our own there. And I hope that we never have to get to a position where we have to let roads go to gravel. The county's in that situation right now, and they're trying desperately to get the community to recognize that so that they could, politically get at least I think they talked about gas tax, that kind of went down. Now they're looking at the vehicle registration fee. That's another avenue for us. If they, either one of those, they proposed sharing that money with the city. So that was about a $600,000 a year bump that would help us over some of these big projects, in addition to what we're collecting from PMUF. But yeah,
It would be from the registration fee?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I guess my worry was that I'm hoping that we have a good grasp of the potential for roads that could be turned to gravel in the future. As opposed to, but it sounds like we're right on that cusp of we have enough funding to hopefully maintain what we own.
Yeah. Gravel roads aren't easy to maintain either. You got to throw money at gravel roads too. So I think we've got a few alleys in town that we don't maintain. I'm pretty sure those are going to have to continue to go to gravel. But right now, streets, I'm hoping that if they're paved, we can keep them paved.
Madison, you want to look at it's almost gravel.
Yeah. Okay, we'll look at Madison.
Okay, item 6C, TAC goals update. That pretty much says it in your handout. We've had a chance to read it. We've got quite a few items that are active, ongoing items.
When I looked at this, I thought, the TAC hasn't necessarily picked goals that are like a specific project. They've been more like programmatical that we just keep looking at and always should. But again, we're supposed to meet
On Thursday.
Thursday? Okay. On Thursday.
Yeah.
Henry and Bob, I can't remember. Are you both coming or?
Yes.
Okay. So, I think the last time we talked about that, we established that we were going to get together. I don't know if you've heard from the other members, but at some point in time, yeah, we need to think about the next goals. And you actually wanted to talk about one of these goals, right?
Yeah, if I could, Chair LaSalle, first of all, on behalf of the commission, thank you all for your work here. Believe it or not, we actually pay attention to what you guys are doing here. And really appreciate all your input and everything. I didn't realize you had this big of a group here, so.
And we have one absent tonight.
I know,
Two.
yeah. So.
Two absent, yeah. Excuse me.
Yeah, so it's quite a crew. Thank you, Chair LaSalle, for keeping all this moving here. So the one thing I was looking at is, and I guess I might have to take my commission hat off to do this, but because it's more of a personal thing right now, because it hasn't really been addressed with the commission. We've talked about it a little bit, but is the property next to McDonald's down there. I see you have it on your 2015 goals, and I didn't know if there's been anything happening since then as far as your perspective, but I appreciate what you've done here where we're taking it off the market and wanting to keep that. Number one, like you're talking about here, it's obviously overflow parking for events down there, but it could be anything from maybe parking for the mill site when that gets built out, that maybe we're gonna have to find extra parking and stuff and we'll have to provide some kind of a transportation to get from this site to the new legacy site. Who knows what the tourist thing is going to happen there, but it goes. I think the biggest thing for me is as you come south on McLaughlin, and you look out just as you cross the bridge, and you see that vista there. Just that's your view. You're now entering Oregon City. I hate to see that interrupted by, you can tell when you continue on and the River Shore Hotel is there, that, just blocks that out. So I appreciate the fact you guys are looking at that as keeping that maybe the way it is. And, the long range view is who knows where, if light rail ever comes to Oregon City, maybe that's a park and ride or something for that, and it's actually a savings account for the city. A few years ago, the city was in kind of rough shape and could have used a little infusion. So you can always sell this property, but right now it's a savings account for us that we can keep this and hold on to it in case we ever need it. So I just want to say thanks, and I see it's a 2015 goal. I didn't know if it's the same moving ahead here. So, but anyway, thanks you guys for your efforts here. So,
Well, I have to say that I was pleased when you first came out on wanting to keep that property quite some time ago, and that's always been a subject that I've wanted to keep that property off of the real estate list. There's a lot of boaters too that use that during the fishing seasons.
yeah. The pressure's off a little bit now because we have the potential of possibility of, well, for sure, one hotel and the sense of maybe another one going to happen. So there's, there could be a couple hotels downtown. That's where the pressure was kind of at for that property, was how are we going to provide for all these tourists? And we just have the one hotel, but now that the pressure's off of the hotel part of that. So anyway, that's
Well, I'm aware of the Hampton Inns plan.
that's correct.
Yeah, but there is maybe another one out, which you probably wouldn't have let us know about yet, but
That's
it's a
correct.
possibility.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, we're now down to item 7, future agenda items. Does anybody have any items for the future agenda they'd like to have discussed? How about the gas tax?
I'd like to discuss it, but every time I bring it up, Sean says he'd like to have the finance people in here to sort of enlighten us as to the realities that might impose.
Well, I'm not sure. Finance, they'd love to see a new revenue stream, I'm sure. I think it's more the fact that we have a pavement maintenance utility fee, and adding another fee like that, we've got other funding issues. I guess that raises another question which did come up last meeting, which was the budget, and maybe makes sense for the future agenda item to be the budget, because
Good idea.
they're going to be. I'm going to miss it, unfortunately, but May 1st, the first budget committee meeting is going to be held, and what I've heard from Wyatt is we're healthy, but we're tight. And so there's a lot more to it than that. But it might make sense to have them come to present the budget to the TAC, at least the transportation realm of the budget. And they've done it. They presented our transportation budget. Maria did not too long
It was
ago,
about
right?
18 months ago.
Has it been that long? Time
I'd
flies.
be very interested in hearing about that, because any jurisdiction that has a amenity like 205, where you could be taking other people's money that are outside the community and bringing it into our community, is a win in my mind. And we have 205 here. We have people driving by that don't live in our community. That would be bringing an influx of funds into our community. I see that as a good thing.
Highway 213 too.
Highway 213 too. People coming in from Canby and ways down south. So
And I don't think that a gas tax would be considered something that would be forced on people, like the people didn't have any choice about a pavement utility fee. They didn't have any choice about the police station fee. And in listening to people, they get a little upset that they feel that some of those things are forced down their throats, where I'm assuming that the voters would have to vote for it, a gas tax.
Yeah, gas tax is voter approved.
It's my understanding that there's impact for approximately 3 months or so, and then after that, everything just kind of levels out with gas tax. And people along I-5, they're not necessarily looking, or 205, looking for the cheapest gas. They say, I need some gas. And geez, a couple pennies more. Am I going to drive out of my way to continue to look for cheaper gas? I just, after that 3 or 4 month period, I think it's out of people's minds. It's that initial shock, perhaps.
My push is only for a couple of pennies a gallon, not a big, enough to cover costs plus provide some your discretionary money to use as seed money for grants and things, and to also for some of these small neighborhood projects. If the neighborhood can raise, say, 50%, you might be able to kick in a little bit to help get it along and get it built.
3 cents a gallon or something.
Yeah, and that's within the noise of gas prices per gallon, and so I can't see that being one that's going to be very much.
So,
I think that
Go
could be
ahead.
discussed with the budget, because that would be budget related, so you could take up both topics. Talk about the budget at our next meeting, the transportation budget, and then talk about potential new revenue sources. And have whatever team of staff members you think would be helpful in the discussion.
Commissioner Shaw?
do we know why the county gas tax went down? I mean, it went out for vote and got voted down, so the voters had a chance to speak here. That wasn't shoved down their throat, so, and it went down, and that would have generated $500,000 to the city. So, before we think about that, we've got to figure out why that one didn't pass.
I saw some.
John, could you contact the county and find out if they had a breakout for the precincts that are in Oregon City, so we could determine if there was a yes vote out of Oregon City? That would be a
Oh, yeah,
big
that'd be
piece
great.
of information
There you
for
go.
that discussion.
Yeah. I don't remember the numbers, but I know they have a breakout. And my recollect was Oregon City didn't support it.
Did not or did?
Did not.
Did not.
But I'll bring you specific
Yeah,
numbers. I
that'd
could
be
be wrong about that because I just, that's kind of my recollect.
There was also, because I remember, it was also like 10 cents or 15 cents a gallon too. I mean, it was significantly more than what I could support.
I thought it was 6 cents.
I thought it was 6 cents
Oh,
too.
good.
It was only 6 cents, and that's the reason too, is I was trying to figure out why it didn't pass. You know, because we have this, we try to go out and educate as much as we can when these things come up. You know, we tried to go out into the neighborhoods and talk about the gas tax. We talked about urban renewal. We talked about the police station, you know, but everything went down. So, so that's why I'm always asking these questions is why? You know, how can we revisit these new revenue sources if we don't know why the other ones failed?
Yeah, that's true. And what I'm thinking is if I got a 25 gallon fill up, and I'm going to pay 3 cents a gallon more, that's 75 cents on it for the whole tank. If the price of gas is going up at a rate of about 6 to 10 cents a month right now.
Well, I think that we do have some reasons that we can give the public. The one was what Jonathan brought up, is the traffic coming through Oregon City would contribute to our coffers.
There you go.
And it wouldn't be like a new fee on their utility bill. I think that would be a good strong argument.
And those are great, Bob. That's just what I'm saying is trying to get people that information.
Yeah.
You know, but that's hard to do, as we found out, so.
And it has to be dedicated to a small source in my mind, a small area of expenditure.
Yeah, you know, if you're gonna pay this, here's what it's going to.
Right.
You know, people wanna know that.
Yeah,
so.
it's going to go as grant match money, or it's going to go as neighborhood improvements or whatever, but it has to be dedicated.
Yes.
Well, so,
I don't know how the rest of the committee feels. I would like to see that pursued further on a future agenda. And perhaps we could all give it some thought, maybe come up with some ideas that we could convince the general public this is a good idea. And then we, of course, have to get the bicycles in on this issue also with their mileage. Just joking.
Yes,
I'll
I just
take
kinda
that
went
for
that way.
Paying gas into that bicycle, sure.
On a slightly, have you heard anything about the state of Oregon going to a mileage fee? And is there anything in the system that might be able to be thrown out about how that's going?
The only thing, I haven't heard anything recently, but I know that they were doing some test areas where they were, where they're tracking mileage of how much a particular driver drove, so that they would then have a charge associated with that mile, all those miles driven.
So substituting a fee per mile for the state gas tax.
Yeah, I know they've tried some things. I haven't heard whether they're thinking about taking it statewide, or if it was just trying to get
last I heard, they were asking for 5,000 volunteers statewide, with the idea that it would become operational in about 10 years.
It has to go that way with the efficiencies of vehicles. I mean, the gas taxes are going to be dropping, or the revenues generated by gas taxes are going to be dropping as cars become more efficient.
Yeah.
So there'll be less money
I just haven't
utilized. So
I haven't heard anything. I don't know of any new legislation that's being proposed on that topic, but I know that they're looking at it. But so for the next meeting, the budget presentation, if I can get Wyatt or Myrea or somebody from their department to present, that's one topic.
Yes.
Okay. The gas tax topic, while again, finance is going to be, they're always open to new revenue streams. They're probably not going to provide you much of an opinion, and they're not necessarily gas tax experts, other than to say in Oregon City, they could probably say, based on the amount of, they may know how many gallons of gas are sold in Oregon City through the information they get from the state, to say what 3 cents would produce. 3 cents, or every penny produces $76,000 or something, so they can maybe help us with that information. So when I think about deliverables, I'm thinking I'll work with them to see what they can help to inform the conversation about, the gas that's sold in Oregon City, and what, a cent would generate in terms of revenue. The other thing that I'm thinking of, I think it's available online on our website, but when we adopted, this would have been 2007, when we adopted the pavement maintenance utility fee, John Ghilarducci from the FCS group created a white paper on the different kinds of funding mechanisms. And I know that hasn't changed much. At a minimum, we could produce that for you and have that available to discuss as well. Would those things work out for at least a deliverable?
And then plus check the voting on the county.
Oh, and I've got that, the voting in OC, yeah, on the gas tax, on the county's gas tax proposal.
Commissioner?
So let's not rule out our relationship with the county.
Right.
And let's see what the county's up to, because there may be something we can just, again, piggyback on with them, which would be a lot easier on our staff.
Absolutely.
You know, so, and I'm not sure what their direction is, whether they're gonna go after gas tax again, or whether it's a vehicle registration fee or something like that, so. But anyway, let's kind of keep our relationship with the county alive here, so.
Oh, one thing I would say is it may pay to have a phone call to Wood Village. They have a city gas tax instituted prior to the city of Portland doing theirs. So they have a certain amount of history with it in the metro area.
I think Happy Valley has it and Sandy has it. I think there's several cities that have it. I always saw gas tax making sense. For instance, I got when about a year ago got a call from the city of Madras, and they were considering pavement maintenance utility fee and wanted to know things like that. I mean, that's a town where there is just nothing but pass-through traffic, right? And there's only one way through town, right? And so Sandy makes a lot of sense because they got a lot of traffic that just drives through there on the way to the mountain. I'm not sure about what town did you?
Wood Village.
Wood Village. They have that one right there on I-84. So
Yeah.
anybody that has that kind of a deal, we're kind of limited on gas stations off of 205, right? I
Well-
guess we've got the one at 213 and we've got the one right here in town, but
Actually, we're kind of limited on gas stations.
yeah. So I mean,
have-
getting
Fred
the
Meyer
gas
does it.
sales in Oregon City and trying to figure out how that what that
We have
means.
about 5 in the city.
Right.
Fred Meyer does a bang-up gasoline business.
Yeah.
They do.
And Stein's Oil and the abandoned Shell station on Moelle is reopened. And there's Berry Hill, there's one at the old Hagen site, and one at South End Road in Warner Parrott.
And Stein Oil has that card lock also there,
Yeah.
which generates a lot of commercial.
And keep in mind, here in a few years, you're gonna have quite a few tourists coming through this town, so.
Oh, yeah.
That's, so whatever you're doing now, you are setting the stage for that. So, you know, this is what, you're being prepared for what's coming up here that you're gonna be able to take advantage of, so.
Part of the finance department's job, of course, would be to provide us the cost of administration. So we'd know how much of that gas tax would be available to be used.
Yeah, at least has to pay for the cost of collecting it.
Yeah, right.
Hence, the county.
Right.
They do
Yeah.
all the work. That was the nice thing about
Yeah,
that gas
exactly.
tax
Yeah,
was
that was good.
they were just gonna cut us a check for $500,000 and we didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
I'll buy into that anytime.
I know, yeah. So,
Okay. Anybody else have anything this evening? This meeting is adjourned.